In this positional preview, we're going to be looking at the Cleveland Browns wide receiver room. I'm going to try to make this video as concise and compact as possible because there's a lot of guys to talk about, a lot of wide receivers on the official roster right now. And while the Browns, the narrative has kind of died down on the DeAndre Hopkins to Cleveland, you know, that talk has kind of simmered down a little bit besides Deshaun Watson still recruiting him to join the team. This group did get a lot of additions in the depth, where last season after the first couple of guys on the depth chart, it started to look a little bit rough as far as guys able to get separation and you know, breakaway speed was definitely an issue for this group last season. So we're going to start right into with Amari Cooper, who was not an issue at all for the Browns last season. He was last year's headliner and still is the current headliner unless the Browns make a huge splash move like DeAndre Hopkins. And he was tremendous as their wide receiver 1 last year. 78 receptions on 132 targets for a total of 1,160 yards, including 9 touchdown catches, which is his career high, most touchdowns in a season for him. So tremendous job from Amari Cooper and the Browns utilizing him and all of that. And again, unless they land like DeAndre Hopkins, there is no doubt that the Browns will be looking to him again this coming season as their number 1 target in the wide receiver room. His route running was fantastic last year. He established himself as a pretty decent. He's a great red zone threat as well. Even though 6'1" doesn't necessarily make him abnormally tall for a wide receiver, he uses his talents and his abilities to win 50-50 balls and make really tough catches in tight corners and stuff like that. So he's been doing a really good job, and he does have a $27.3 million cap hit, which is good for 6th highest in the NFL, which you might think it's a little steep for Amari Cooper, but for what he brought to this Browns team last year, he was a legitimate threat for them, and who knows, with another year of Deshaun Watson progressing, maybe that threat just becomes even bigger. And he is under contract for at least the next 2 seasons, so the Browns do have a little bit of contract security with him in the organization. Moving on now to Donovan Peoples-Jones, entering his 4th and final year of his rookie deal, 6th round pick out of Michigan. He was really solid last year as the Browns' second option. Although Cleveland might not be able to afford his second contract, there has been some rumblings that Donovan Peoples-Jones will probably be due a pretty significant pay raise after his first contract ends, and who knows if the front office is going to want to pick that up when they probably will have other needs that they want to shore up that cap space with. And who knows if Donovan Peoples-Jones survives that. Maybe he prices himself out of Cleveland's price range and he goes and gets the bag somewhere else. But all I know is Donovan Peoples-Jones will play for Cleveland this season, so I'll worry about the next contract after next season. So last season, he had 61 receptions on 96 targets for 839 yards. All of those are significantly career highs for him. Huge year statistically as far as jumping up as far as statistics go, including 3 touchdown receptions. He's also been a pretty decent punt returner for the Browns, although it has seemingly been out of necessity. Cleveland's been trying to shuffle guys in and out of that punt returning position. Just so happens that Peoples-Jones has been the best at it, and he did get the Browns' first punt return touchdown since Travis Benjamin did it in 2015 last season, I believe, against the Houston Texans. And with those punt return yards, he ended up having more than 1,000 all-purpose yards when you combine his rushing, receiving, and returning yards, total of 1,064 yards there. So a really good, solid piece for the Browns. Definitely projects to be their number 2 opposite Amari Cooper as of right now. And again, next contract, I'll worry about that after this season. We can talk about that then. Moving on to a new acquisition in Elijah Moore, acquired from the Jets for a 2nd round pick, and the Browns also got a 3rd round pick back in that deal. So essentially they just traded back in the draft to acquire Elijah Moore. Last season with the Jets, he had 37 receptions on 65 targets for 446 yards and 1 touchdown. And while those stats might not immediately jump out at you, the Browns did need a slot wide receiver with a lot of breakaway speed, and that's what they got in Elijah Moore. This guy is quick, and they're hoping that if Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones can give defenses some issues, then and maybe even guys like David Njoku, then Elijah Moore will have a lot of time and space to get yards after the catch and create himself, get some routes to get him open, so that get him some wide windows for Deshaun Watson to throw into. So his speed is definitely what the Browns were looking for with Elijah Moore, and they got it. Elijah Moore unhappy with the Jets. The Jets get McCole Hardman, and so all of a sudden Elijah Moore becomes expendable, and I think the Browns benefit because of that. I think this could be mutually beneficial, as I think Elijah Moore could really explode starting at the slot receiver with this team, and the Browns obviously could use a really quick guy like him. Moving on to Jakeem Grant. He was brought in last offseason to shore up the return game. However, he did tear his Achilles in training camp, unfortunately, and he was out for the entire year. Now, they could have cut him. They did have an out clause in his contract, and it would have saved them a tiny bit of cap space, but they did end up bringing him back for this season. That leads me to think that the Browns do see him as being a part of their 53-man roster. Probably at the very least, the main kickoff return guy, as Jerome Ford is probably going to take more of a responsibility as the second string running back. And I do think that the Browns probably might try to want to get him on punt returns as well. Moving on to Cedric Tillman, this year's third-round pick out of Tennessee. He did deal with injuries with the Volunteers last season. But his junior year, he had 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns, more than 1,000 yards. But senior year, he did have some pretty. If you extrapolate his stats from the senior year to a full season, they are pretty encouraging. But again, those injury deals does kind of make me a little nervous. But I try not to predict how their careers will play out based on their injury history, because that's just getting into a whole can of worms. He is listed at 6'3", which would make him tied tallest in the wide receiver room with Rashawn Henry. Maybe they see him as the next guy if they can't get a deal done with Donovan Peoples-Jones. Maybe they see him as somebody who can step into that role, but we haven't seen him play in the NFL yet, so who knows. Then you have another new acquisition in Marquise Goodwin, entering his 10th NFL season, his 11th NFL year, as he did opt out of the COVID season in 2020. Signed a one-year deal to a pretty cheap contract as far as NFL standards go. He played with Seattle last year with 27 receptions on 42 targets, 387 total yards, and 4 touchdowns. He's a guy who is short, but he's also pretty quick, and I think he's a solid option for a slot receiver right behind Elijah Moore. And as far as the guys who I think have a guaranteed roster spot, I think those are it. I listed off 6 guys there. Last season, if you count Demetric Felton as a wide receiver, the Browns only brought in 6 wide receivers to their final 53-man roster last season. If you don't count Demetric Felton, they only brought in 5. So I think the rest of these guys, they're going to have to compete, and they're really going to play for spots. Starting with David Bell, who I don't really want to give up on him yet. He's entering only his 2nd season in the NFL. His rookie season, I don't want to say it was bad, but he didn't really pop off either. 24 receptions on 35 targets for 214 yards, no touchdowns. Just kind of an uninspiring rookie year for David Bell. It can certainly get better, which is why I don't want to give up on him, but I do feel like with all the Browns additions that they've been making to the wide receiver room, they're kind of leaning away from relying on David Bell to turn into anything special. Then there's Anthony Schwartz. Yeah, we all know the deal on Schwartz. He's a fast guy. He was a track star, but just holding onto the ball in any capacity has been way too much of an issue. Too many drops, too many fumbles. Can't hang on to the ball, probably can't be on this roster. Then you have Michael Woods, had a solid training camp last season, did play in 10 NFL games, but he only had 5 receptions. Doesn't really seem like he was part of a lot of their offense, wasn't featured very prominently. Might get some special teams reps, who knows. Then you have Mike Harley Jr. and Daylen Baldwin, both of guys who were on the Browns practice squads last year. We went through this before. I think that's probably where they end up after the season as well, probably just sent down to the practice squad. Jaelon Darden, he was a late season addition off of waivers for the Browns. All he did for them was return 2 punts, and seeing how Donovan Peoples-Jones or Jakeem Grant can take punt returning duties, I don't see him making this 53-man roster. And that leads us to Rashawn Henry, just a guy who's been bouncing around practice squads for the last couple of seasons. Again, unless some of the guys I just mentioned have absolutely insane training camps and preseason games, I don't think they make the 53-man roster. Of all the names that I just kind of lightning round mentioned there, maybe one of them makes the final 53-man roster. If I had to guess one, maybe David Bell, again, just off the idea that you don't want to give up on a guy just after one rookie season where he wasn't all that bad but wasn't all that good either. Maybe David Bell makes it out of camp, but the rest of them, I think they're on their way out, at least as far as making the 53-man roster. Maybe some of them end up on some practice squads here and there. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you for watching if you did stick around this long. Let me know in the comments what you think about this Browns wide receiver group down in the section below, and I will see you at the next one.